Hi, I'm Tom Stevenson and welcome to Lecture 1B of our Residential Construction Technology course. In this lecture, we're going to be reviewing and looking at what zoning is, what the permit process is, why we do it, some of the hows of doing it, and we'll discuss those parts further in our synchronous lecture as well. So we're going to get into this area of building permits. And as you can see by the image above me, there are a number of permits that can be required. You can sort of see them over here. NH would be for new house as an example, building permit. There's DM is a demolition permit. We've got a plumbing permit and a drain permit shown here. And you have to post these permits outside the structure or in the window if it's a renovation of the structure, so it's clearly visible from the street. So there's an array of different permits that are required. So we're going to look at the why, the when, the process, the types, what's needed. We're also going to talk about a minor variance. That's where you need to change zoning and when inspections typically take place. So really, why do we need a permit? What are the reasons? And it's really to a method of ensuring that whatever is designed according to building code requirements, and in Ontario, we design to the Ontario Building Code. So if you hear me say OBC, it's Ontario Building Code. If you hear NBC, it's National Building Code. ABC, Alberta Building Code, but I'll be really referring to the OBC or the NBC. Your textbooks, they always refer to the NBC, and there's not a big difference, as I think I mentioned in a previous lecture, between the NBC and the OBC, except in certain areas like energy efficiency and a number of other areas. But if you know how to read one, you know how to really read and interpret the other. That's the good thing. So the process is more or less the same. So permit ensures quality safety of current and future owners, and that's really a minimum standard. You have to remember the building code is the minimum acceptable standard. And I think I heard it said best once when somebody said, you have to think of it that the building code is the minimum standard and anything just slightly beyond it is illegal. So it's not like it's this great utopian standard. It's the minimum acceptable. And to be quite honest, it'll ensure that buildings won't collapse and that they're structurally safe and sound, and all of those measures have been taken into place. But at the same time, they can't have them so high, the standards, that people wouldn't be able to afford these buildings or structures or homes from that perspective. So there's always a bit of lobbying that goes on when you want to change building code requirements, because when you change them and you up standards, usually that ups cost. And is that making our housing less affordable to individuals? So that becomes kind of debatable areas. But definitely our building codes do ensure that our buildings are structurally sound and safe. And it also does give some peace of mind to anybody that's having work done on their house or is constructing a new house, that there has been a third-party inspection done by a regulatory authority that's not, influenced by the builder, the developer, the contractor. So that's how that protection is put in place. And also it provides access to expertise. The people doing the inspections, they understand the building code really well. And if there's questions about what can be done and what can't be done, if there's gray areas that need to be clarified, they're the ones to be able to clarify it with. So building permit application forms, there's not one application form for Ontario or for Canada for that matter. It varies by municipality. They do look more or less similar, but you could go to any municipality and get their form. And these days you could pretty much, most municipalities have everything online, so you could actually get the application online through that building department. You can we'll probably look at that, how you do that, but you can just click on it and then there's a form to be filled out, information that you have to be able to provide. If you don't have it, you'll have to get it or pay for it in some cases. So it really does make sure that you're complying, if you get a building permit, that the building and structure that's been built complies with building code requirements. So it's a means of insurance and enforcement to make sure that those things take place. And if things aren't complete on the permit process or on the drawings, or something's missing, doesn't comply, then it will be returned to you to fix and then resubmit. So you really have a right to a permit, as long as it doesn't contravene any building code requirements, any local zoning requirements. If it's a new home, you have to be registered by your province's insurance corporation to ensure that the actual insurance is taking place. So, Tarion is the insurance company for Ontario. Now, they're not really an insurance company per se. They're the governing body that ensures that the work that's been done is warranted and that new homeowners are protected. So if you're going to be a builder in Ontario, you must go through their registration process. You have to have passed the appropriate courses so that you understand Part 9 of the building code, which is for housing and small buildings. And you have to have met their financial requirements. In other words, they don't want somebody to build a house, have it half built, and then go bankrupt and then leave a homeowner high and dry. So the warranty program is really a good thing for new homeowners wanting to purchase a home. It protects them and it brings viability and the ability of people that want to buy a new house, that security that this house will be built and it's protected. If the builder goes bankrupt, there's still protections in place for them if, say, the house is settling or there's major structural issues somehow. So the warranty program is there for that purpose, and it's mandatory. It's not like you can say, oh, it's okay, I don't want my house to have it. It's mandatory unless you're building the house for yourself. And then there's all kinds of regulations around that, so that some people don't build it for themselves and then sell it right away. So it is a good protection to have in place. In other provinces, they may have separate insurance bodies that do the insurance to make sure that that takes place. So you have to check by province. So you don't need to have a permit when you're, not doing structural work. So if you are removing load-bearing walls or adding a raised deck, anything above 24 inches would be considered a raised deck. You don't want people to fall off the deck and hurt themselves. All of these types of things require permits. If you're replacing a heating system or doing plumbing, because you mess up on the plumbing, you could have sewer gas coming into the house. You could have backflow issues and contamination of the water, electrical wiring. You could have fire. So these are all reasons why you would need permits. And in the cases of these, you would need individual permits. In the cases of this, you would need an overall building permit. So these are some points. I would always caution you to check the local municipality with regards to when do I need a permit. This is a link for Toronto, and you can go to Toronto and see exactly the details on when you need a permit and when you don't need a permit. You can also check with the local building department, say what you want to do, and find out whether it requires a permit or not. Usually when people have a project in mind, they have an idea or what they want to have, and usually it kind of follows this flow chart. Investigate the zoning requirements. Can I do this on this property? If you can, then you can have the drawings drawn. If it doesn't require a permit, then you're good to go. But you want to make sure that the permit requirements and the zoning requirements are met. And if they're not, you can also think about having the plans drawn, submitting the plans to the building department for permit. And if their zoning is okay, then you'll get the building permit. If the zoning, the drawings, everything's okay. If there's a problem with the zoning, and you would have found that out back here, then what you want to do is go to the committee of adjustment. You could, of course, revise the plans that doesn't need it. I would hope that you would check that out back here. And you go to committee of adjustment, that's where you get a variance. The zoning is not written in stone. So a lot of times the zoning you can get changed, but definitely not all of the times because it depends what you want to do. It's sort of like why you don't see a McDonald's in the middle of a residential neighborhood. You'll see it on main streets. You won't see it, surrounded by houses on all sides. There's zoning that allows what can be like a retail store where it could be located. And where residential buildings are. There's zoning regarding the density. Can I put a condominium building here, or is it zoned for only a certain density so that I can't do that? Can I change the zoning? Absolutely. But in some places it may be very difficult to get it changed. So you go through this committee of adjustment process, and if you're successful, the zoning gets changed. If it doesn't, then there's always an appeals process that you can go through to try to get that changed. In the province, instead of the municipalities looking at the appeals process, the province looks at that. And that makes it a little bit less of a political process, because when you're going for a zoning change, there's signs that are posted. The neighbors find out about what's going on. If they really don't want it, they may gather together at the committee meeting to protest it. Politicians get involved because the local councillor doesn't want to have all their constituents upset. So they'll look at that and does this make sense? And so by appealing it to the provincial level, they may look at it differently with less of a political sort of viewpoint. Councillors don't like that, and believe me, the city doesn't like that. But it's kind of a different process. For example, there might be a bunch of condominium buildings being built near a new subway station, and the neighborhood's all upset. Well, the councillor might try to protect the neighborhood because they're upset, but you just spent billions of dollars on a subway and a station there. It makes sense to put higher density in those locations. So there's all this push and pull that takes place. So types of permits, we have building permits, demolition permits, as you kind of saw from that photograph that I had earlier, and it had building, DM for demolition, PS for plumbing, and heating permits. So those are all permit requirements. And these, except for the building permit and the demolition permit, these are usually taken out by the GC. The individual permits are taken out usually by the subcontractors because they have to be licensed in those trades. They typically have to have a master's license in those trades to be able to pull those permits, including electrical. Difference with electrical is electrical permit is gotten through the local hydro authority, whereas these are taken through the building departments of the towns or the cities. So you have to look at the municipality, what do they want, and provide them what they want. This is a short list of things. Usually they'll want them everything digital. Sometimes they still want them printed. I'm not sure why, because where are they going to put them? But usually digital copies. And they may want it in a certain format, usually a PDF format. They might want them compiled a certain way, so you have to follow those protocols, whatever the municipality wants. Other requirements that they'll look at is do you have a recent or current survey? So in lecture 1A, we talked about surveys and we talked about site plans. Well, they want a site plan that shows where the building is going on the structure and how it's assigned there, but they also want the survey of the lot. And some municipalities want fairly recent surveys. They might have a 5-year or 10-year cap on it. If your house is 25 years old and you want to add an addition to it, that might mean you have to get a new survey, and that could cost several $1,000s. Just it's good to know that ahead of time. Usually you go to the building department, and usually the building department is where the local city hall. In Toronto, it's where the old municipalities were, like North York, East York, York, Scarborough, Etobicoke. There used to be a city hall in each one of those areas. Well, usually the building permit area, like North York, is in the old North York City Hall on Yonge Street north of Shepherd. Toronto, it's in downtown Toronto City Hall, the real City Hall, if you will. So anywhere, time period, it depends on the municipality. It depends on what they have. Sometimes they have fast tracks for quick permits. Usually a house permit or something of that nature might take several months just to get a regular permit. You have to look at the municipality. Sometimes permits take longer and shorter. There are requirements that are spelled out by the building code and enforced by the province, but cities can get around that too if they find anything wrong quickly with your process, they can just flip it back to you, and the whole process of time starts again. So you want to make sure that what you're submitting is done correctly, so that it doesn't reset the clock and slow down your approvals process. Zoning is a part of the process, big part of the process. They're going to do a zoning review, and they're going to make sure that you comply with the local zoning. Every city has a master plan, and they've determined what's acceptable in certain areas to go in. That's why you see, retail stores grouped in certain areas, manufacturing and industrial in certain areas, and residential in certain areas. And then there's the gray areas where they cross, or there's areas that are in flux or change. Liberty Village, which is filled with condos now, it used to be all warehousing and light manufacturing. And so over time, that's gone through zoning changes, which has made that kind of like, some are loft condominiums. Some have been totally torn down and redeveloped into new condominiums. Liberty Village is around King and Dufferin, if you don't know where I'm talking about, Queen and Dufferin. So sometimes zoning, you might have to get a zoning change for the simplest of things. I remember when I was 19, I bought a house. Yeah, I bought a house when I was 19, and I wanted to put a new porch on the front of this house. So dismantle the old porch and put a new, nice, long kind of one that you could sit out on, stone porch. And when I did the check for the permit, it contravened the existing house where it was built. The survey showed the existing house was 24 feet 11 inches from the property line, the front property line setback. Well, I had to get the zoning changed to allow for that, because the house was not supposed to be less than 25 feet. So for that 1 inch, I had to get that corrected. It was going to go through for sure, but I had to get that corrected. I also had a limitation on how far out the porch could go. I think it was only 6 feet. So I probably wouldn't have got the zoning change if the porch, if it had complied. But once I knew I had to get a zoning change for the 24 foot 11 to say it was okay, then I went for the zoning change for the 6 foot. Instead, I made it 8 foot, the front porch. So I had a much bigger front porch. Just because the zoning process costs money and it takes time. And so in this case, I had to wait the time anyways. I had to pay the money anyways. So I put in for the extra item that I want, and I got it. Of course, it wasn't a big request, so that was easy enough to do. But zoning, it could be anything small. Sometimes you can build a brand new house, big house, and it complies with all the zoning, and you don't even have to do a zoning change. So it just depends on the lot, the property, and what you want to do. But you always have to review it and see if that makes sense. To get that change is called a minor variance. It goes to what they call a committee of adjustment. And the committee of adjustment is filled with the city planners. If depending on what the changes to the zoning, you may have the local counselor show up to the committee of adjustment meetings, because they've notified your neighbors. You want to build a new infill house. You're going to tear this house down. You want to build this new infill house, and it's going to contravene the rear rear yard setback for the house. And so you might have neighbors that are kind of concerned, because maybe it's going to block the light into their backyards and things of that nature. And they may show up to complain. It doesn't mean you won't get it. It may be a little bit harder to get, but if other neighbors have had these kind of houses put in your neighborhood, then that's kind of set the precedent, so it'll probably pass. So there's usually this sort of sign of a community meeting, and then everybody's pulled into the community meeting to discuss what happened. I have my own little personal story here. This is over at Wilson Heights and Shepherd, right near Downsview Station on the subway. I owned a story and a half house that was over here up to about 13 years ago, I guess, 14 years ago. And what happened was we got a notice. We got a notification that the builder wanted to build a condominium. Makes sense. It's only about 2 blocks, less than 2 blocks to the subway. But they wanted to increase the density, which would require that they go 9 stories. And they were wanting to do a whole bunch of other things. And so we wanted it to be kept to the 6-story height. We didn't want it to contravene what they call the angular plane, a line of sight from the backyards. And the builder, of course, he bought up 6 properties, 6 houses that were on Shepherd, which today makes no sense in the city to have houses on Shepherd. Highest and best use, from chapter 1 of Understanding Construction Drawings, highest and best use, you're looking for what's property is that I could buy for this lower cost and then make into something that's worth more money and sell it and make a decent profit that will fit the zoning requirements and the permit requirements that I can do it. And so the builders built about 4 or 5 other condominiums in the area and had success at it. So tried it with us. I think we shocked them a little bit, because when we had the committee meeting, I showed up. My wife, who's very good at negotiating, came. One of the other neighbors here was a building inspector. One of the other neighbors too here was a developer. And so we actually got around 70 people in the neighborhood to show up at this meeting. And so it was kind of tough. And the politician at first is kind of like right next to the developer saying this is a good thing. And then kind of when the politician saw there's so many people there, kind of started distancing themselves from the developer because they get elected and they don't want to upset. You got 70 homeowners in the neighborhood who might tell another 300 homeowners in the neighborhood. That could be a negative. So the counselors have to be very careful in those cases. So it does get to be quite a political process that goes on. We call that NIMBYism, not in my backyard, and literally it was in our backyard. So the counselor formed a committee, and we of people that were most directly affected, and we were. And we met with the builder, and they tried to mediate to try to get us to come to an agreement. So we kind of wanted the builder to do 9 stories, but to tier the top stories so that it would be stepped back so that you're not looking over the backyard so much. And the builder at the end of the day didn't want to do that. So they decided to go for the variance and try to push it through the city. The city sided with the community. That's the political process. So when the city sides with the community, that means they'll pay for the lawyers to fight the builder. So the builder then appealed it to the Ontario Municipal Board, which is kind of like the Supreme Court of Zoning. They've got a new name for it now, but it's basically the same idea. And the Ontario Municipal Board typically sides with the developers more often than not. So that was kind of nerve-wracking. But we went to the Ontario Municipal Board, and we presented there at the municipal board. The builder presented, with basically traffic control and a whole bunch of other things. Cost them a lot of money. They have to hire a lawyer, and usually it's going to cost a builder developer in the hundreds of thousands once you start going to the Ontario Municipal Board. A minor variance isn't that expensive, but Ontario Municipal Board gets quite expensive if you want to win. And at the end of the day, it was kind of a compromise. So the judge said that the builder had to tier the top 2 floors, not 3 floors. But we wanted mature trees planted in everybody's backyard. By mature, I mean like 30-foot trees. We wanted a certain fencing. We looked at the site plan. We talked about site plans. The builder had like an exhaust from the underground parking at the back fence, and we said, no, we don't want that. We want that closer to the building because we don't want to hear the bearings of the fan. We wanted the lighting to the parking lot shielded. So there were all these things we picked up from the site plan that we asked for approvals. And to be quite honest, we got most of those approvals. So it kind of worked well overall in that sense, and we were able to go forward with that. So it's sort of a personal case in that sense, and it shows how the process works. And it's the first time I was ever on that side. I was usually always trying to get zoning changes. You always got to be able to look at things from the other perspective and see it from their perspective. If I'm the builder, I don't blame them at all for wanting to do that. But if you're in the community too, you want to limit that. So this is at 1 King Street, up to 5, it depends where you are. And this was a building that, for whatever the reason, this building had unlimited height restriction. So the density allowed unlimited height, and that was an opportunity. They never thought that they could put a 50-story building because it's such a narrow lot. I think it's only 30 feet across, so structurally they thought that would be difficult. But they did build it, and so that was an opportunity that a builder looked for highest and best value, right? In that neighborhood I just mentioned to you with the condominium, there was also a property, and this was going to be sold off by the city. to a developer to put condominiums. And quite honestly, it made a lot of sense. The subway is right there. But we fought as a community to get this to be made parkland because there was no other parkland there. And you can do those things. So there can be political activism that can help influence how areas are developed in the city. If nobody gets involved, then it just happens the way it happens. The city has planners, but it may not be in the neighborhood's best interest unless they're influenced. And even at this point, the builder that was building the condominium on Shepherd was quite happy that we influenced this to be a park, because then he actually called it Park Place by the time he started building it, right? So he named it because the park was coming there. So builders may also, municipalities may also require builders to put up signs if they're building, like this is in a flight path right near Pearson Airport, and they're putting in a whole bunch of developments. So they're warning the residents, and it's actually in their purchase sale agreement, that you buy this house, you are aware this is in a flight path, there will be planes flying up to midnight and that sort of thing. So don't complain later on. That's why the house should be less expensive because of that. If you build something and you're not in compliance and you're building something different than what the permit requires, as this case happened to be, you get a stop work order put on the house. So it stops it in its track. This house was sat there for about 10 years. I think somebody lit it on fire and then before getting rebuilt. Limiting distance. When you build a house, you're limited as to window. Why would somebody pull this section in? Why wouldn't you just have a straight wall with a window across? Because that would put this window too close to the house next door. So you have to have a separation of at least 4 feet, and this coming back inward would move the window in 4 feet from the house next door. There's all kinds of limiting distance requirements that you'll learn when you do your building code courses that limit how much area that you can have of windows, the type of firewalls to reduce flame spread from one unit to the other. That's always a concern when we're building. We don't want to build houses that the fire can just spread like matchsticks from one to the next. That's something that happens in the old row housing that was built maybe 100 years ago, and one unit catches fire and it just spreads so fast the whole building is done. Today we want to have things that slow that down so the fire department can get there and put the fire out. So other approvals that may come into process, conservation authorities, public works, historical boards, planning and development department may have other approvals for certain areas, and transit commission. So you can't just build a house or a condominium building on top of where you got subway tunnels and things of that nature. So the good thing about these ones, there will be flags on your property, and the building department would tell you, you've got to get this approval first. You got to get this approval next. One of the times where I bought a property and was building on it, was going to build on it, was the Niagara Escarpment Commission. So you had to get approval for them before you could get approval to build a house. Your permit can be revoked. Just because you get a permit doesn't mean it's good forever. You've got 6 months. If you provide false information, of course, that could do it. Or if the work stops for a significant period of time, because codes change, right? So as codes change, you want to have that in place. Inspections can occur at any time, but they must occur at certain times. So an inspector can come by any time and drop in, but they must occur at certain times. And they have a right to stop the work if what you're doing is wrong, needs to be rectified, or you've covered up things that you shouldn't have before you got a permit. This is taken from your CMHC book, and it sort of is a pretty good list of times when a permit should be gotten. You also see a listing in the Understanding Construction Drawings book as well. But whenever you get a permit, you will be given a list of when you have to have inspections, and you have to follow that list. So don't just go by this. This just gives you an idea. You have to go by what the municipality has given you with regards to inspections, and they will sign off on the various inspections that they were done. You have to look at the municipality, how much time you need. Usually it's at least 48 hours lead time from when you call them to when they'll do an inspection. Some municipalities, they don't have the people to do all the inspections, so it might take longer. You have to make sure that occurs. Very helpful if you are going to have inspections that whoever's on your site is knowledgeable with the building code. They can talk to the inspector, they can ask questions. So it's very helpful that way. I remember I had one inspection one time, and the building inspector was looking at it. It was the way I had ventilated this flat roof, and they were basically telling me I was going to have to tear everything apart because I did it wrong. And you have to be very polite, you have to be very professional, you have to not say what you're thinking, and believe me, I was thinking some stuff. So I went to the truck, I got the building code, and I started pointing to things and pointing to things. I said, so this is this, this is this, this is this. Can you please help me out? I just want to learn what I'm doing wrong here. And the inspector kind of stopped in his tracks, and he actually said to me, I never saw a contractor, because we were just doing a custom home, that had the building code in their truck before. He said, you know what? It's okay. You can leave it this way. What he was doing, he was telling me how he thought was a best practice. That's not how the building code works. The building code works, are you meeting the minimum standards required for building? Are you following the designs that were approved, right? Not what you think is your best practice that's going to cost me a whole pile of work. But you have to be polite, because they can, they can be really sticklers, and they can cause some issues where there's gray areas. So always be very, very professional. But the more knowledgeable you are, the better it is. So when you take your individual building code courses in your program, make sure you pay attention, because it can be very helpful for you in your future. You don't have to be a building inspector for it to be helpful for you to understand those things. So that's why it's helpful for that case. If you've covered something, you may have to uncover it. So you may be required to uncover it. Some municipalities may allow you to photograph things. I would say that's less likely. So don't count on that one. But you have to make sure that that would be pre-approved by the building department, or an engineer to certify the work, but only if it's accepted by the building department. Again, that's getting to be more rare, as there's been court cases where building departments have lost on that. Just know what you're able to do and not do. And they should be able to print you out a copy that they've accepted this. Keep those copies, or have digital copies. Digital is always better in my mind than a written copy. Also, if they're doing inspections and there's some deficiencies they want you to fix up, especially when it comes to occupancy near the end of the project, that's important. Occupancy is a key inspection, because that means you can use the project for its intended use. George Brown College building, E-building, we needed occupancy. That means that we could run classes. No occupancy, no classes. A house, you want to get occupancy, no occupancy, people can't move in. So that's an important thing to remember. There's always going to be little things that may not contravene occupancy, and that gets into usually close out with the project and more with the Terry-on warranty program than anything else. And that final part is, once you've got occupancy, there's still a final certificate of clearance. That just writes everything off. It means everything was good, and you want that to be the case, because you never know what can come up later on. We'll talk about some of those things later on, some of those kind of cases that can come up. So that's kind of where I wanted to take us with this part, or this first lecture 1A and 1B. Kind of looked at the survey, site plans, permit applications, zoning, variance, inspections. And so you're comfortable with the fact that there is a process in place. There are these regulatory requirements. It's the city or town that enforces the building code. It's the province that that constructs the building code. Most of them are based on the National Building Code of Canada as a model code. Federal doesn't enforce the building code. They just pay to get a lot of the research and bring in the potential parties and make sure that there's a good model building code that can be adopted across Canada through the provinces. Okay, so with that said, thanks again for lecture 1B, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in class and our next lectures. So Tom Stevenson signing off. Have a wonderful day.